Hi there. Well, my name is Parrish. Obviously, I'm a member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, but let me introduce myself a little more completely so you know that I know what I'm talking about. I grew up in the military. I was born on a military base in England during the Korean War, graduated from high school on a military base in Japan during the Vietnam War. My father and mother and I were all NCOs in the Air Force. Dad joined the Merchant Marines during World War II. He lied about his age, of course. After World War II, he was in the Army Air Force, where he fought the Hut Guerrillas rebellion in the Philippines in the 40s and was injured. Then he went on and joined the Strategic Air Command. He was the first man assigned there. Mom was in the first group of women to go through Air Force basic training back in '48. She had to resign because they did not allow women to be married and on active duty at the same time back then. I came around in '53 when they were in England, and Dad did 2 tours in Vietnam while I was growing up. The movie The Green Beret came out in 1968, and I saw that when Dad was in Vietnam and would not let my mother see that movie back then. She still has not yet seen that movie, and I hope she never does. Dad agrees with me. I've been doing military counseling for about 25 years now. You could say I started the day after my dad got back from Vietnam in December of '68, and you would not be inaccurate. Growing up with a Vietnam vet father is doing military counseling. For those of you who are significant others or wives of Vietnam vets, you know what I'm talking about. Part of this is because of a phenomena called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's basically a psychological problem that is created by being in a traumatic situation, and it has permanent, lasting, perhaps totally debilitating effects upon individuals. Part of my job of helping veterans with this problem is getting them adequate compensation from the Veterans Administration so that they can live their lives in something approaching normal, even though they're never going to be able to hold a decent job or even have a good relationship with another individual human being for the rest of their lives. But one of the things that doing this kind of disability claims work has taught me is that a lot of people going into the military don't know what they're doing, period. They don't know what's going on in the military, they don't know what's going on in their lives, and for a lot of bad reasons, they make the decision to sign the enlistment document, and almost inevitably, they end up on my doorstep with a disability claim. A lot of times, it has nothing to do with going into combat. It's the trauma of going through basic training that is too much for a lot of people. So, one of the things that attracted me to VVAW and keeps me involved in the work on a regular basis is making sure that young people know the full life in the military, not just what the recruiters give you. I say that because from '60 to '65, my dad was an Air Force recruiter working in Oak Lawn, Illinois. In 1964, he was Military Recruiter of the Year, and the record that he set then still stands. 580 people recruited in one 12-month period. Dad was one of the most honest people I've ever known, and part of the reason I say that was because of his recruiting practices. Of course, being a little dependent kid, I'd sit in the back room stamping his address and all the fancy recruiting material that he was handing out at high schools. But that also meant that I could listen to him recruit. And without exception, he would try to make sure that everybody going into the military was qualified, first of all, to go in, but secondly, they were prepared. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the reason I do counter-recruiting is for recruiting purposes. I am trying to make sure that I have no more disability claims to work from GIs who couldn't deal with life in the military because it wasn't expected. So, if I do my job right, and if you do go into the military, it's because you know what's expected of you in the military. You know that it is expected that you will not only risk your life, you will risk your sanity by taking another human being's life. A lot of people still don't understand the horrible memories that come with being in combat and taking another human's life. We've never had to do that in civilian life. We just grew up in a nice, peaceful country here with McDonald's all over the places. You don't have to worry about these kind of things. But going into the military, if you take another human being's life, you're going to have to live with that. And if you do it for a good reason, it's a lot easier to live with it. Those of us who went through Vietnam have a hard time finding a damn good reason for what we did. But that's what makes it more difficult to live with. So, the whole thing for us is, if there's going to be a war, and we're going to send young American kids to go fight and grow up in that war, then it better be for a damn good reason. There better be a reason why we're willing to kill our children or have our children live with a potentially debilitating disorder like PTSD. So, where's the national debate over our involvement in Yugoslavia? That debate takes place in the hearts and the minds of every young person thinking about going into the military. It should take place in the hearts and minds of every citizen of this country thinking about whether or not to send those kids into war, but it doesn't. So, for those young people thinking about going in the military, you have a responsibility to yourself to do the decision-making that your country has not done. You have to decide what it's like. I remember being 18 and having to deal with the testosterone poisoning of that age, and having to control myself and learn self-discipline, and having to find out that when self-discipline doesn't work, a good whack upside the head is going to have to do. That's the way life is in the military too. If you do not do your job, if you disobey regulation, disobey orders, there are consequences. Growing up in the military, I knew from the get-go that when a GI went to bed at night, he had violated some regulation during the day. Without exception, every GI violates a regulation during the day. It might be your shoes were not shiny enough, your brass was not polished enough, you didn't salute that lieutenant quickly enough, but you violated some regulation. So the only decision is, who gets punished? There is no decision about who's guilty. We're all guilty. The question is, who's going to get punished for violating the regulation? Unfortunately, in today's military, if the color of your skin is white, it's not going to be you, probably. If it's not white, it probably will be. Because we live in a racist society. I don't know why I should have to explain that to people, but we need to understand we have racists in this society, and unfortunately, the military is a magnet for this. So that's why whenever I see something about Fort Bragg and some GI there with swastikas on his dorm in his barracks, I'm not surprised. I was stationed at Pope Air Force Base right next to Fort Bragg for a year. Some guys over at Bragg would go out and buy an old used car, paint racist graffiti on it, take it out to the reservation, and blow it up. They'd just shoot the hell out of it. Because that's what they like doing. And they couldn't find a real person to do that to, so they did it to a car. Women in the military have to understand that 75% of women in the military report sexual harassment. 50% report assault and rapes. Women have to understand when they go into the military that the biggest danger is not from an enemy soldier with a gun, it's from your own supervisor behind a locked door in his office. You've got to treat walking down a military compound as if you're walking through the quad at 2 a.m. You've got to know you're in a dangerous situation and that something could easily happen to you there as anywhere else. There is no guarantee of protection on a military base from your own supervisor. The guys who work next to you in the shop, you never know. But that's part of the problem with growing up with testosterone poisoning, isn't it? For both male and female. And that's part of the problem with enlisting in the military, is this society takes advantage of young men who want to prove they are young men and no longer boys. For a while, it used to be, are you married? Then it used to be, are you a virgin? Now, it's how much blood you have on your hands. Are you able to go out and pick a fight and win a fight? Can you prove you're a man? Well, if you're a Marine, you can prove you're a man just by being a Marine. You don't have to pick a fight. The same thing with any uniform. The military recruiters take advantage of this. They want you to think the way to prove yourself is to put on the uniform, obey the orders, and do your job. That's not really how you prove you're a man. But that's not something that I can ever tell an 18 or 19-year-old because it's taken me 20 years after that to realize it myself. All we can do is try to make you think twice about going in so that if you do decide to go in, you know that there are some things that the recruiters aren't telling you. Like I said, my dad was a recruiter for 5 years. Back in 1971, Dad got medevaced out of Japan. His injury he got 20 years earlier finally became totally disabling. I got back to the States. I was a young draft-age kid just waiting for Vietnam to come around. But lucky for me, when I was in Japan, I did volunteer work at a medevac hospital on base. This is where the GIs who were injured in Vietnam were taken for treatment to get ready to survive the trip back to the United States. So I got to talk to Vietnam vets when I was still 18. And they were the ones who let me in on what the hell was really going on. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't the lifer. He wouldn't tell his son about the stuff that he ran into in Vietnam. I was with him just last weekend for his 50th anniversary. He still will not tell me how he got that Bronze Star 25 years ago, 30 years ago. I know that there are only certain ways you get that medal. So I know what must have happened, but I don't know the details. And I probably never will, because that's the way it is. For a lot of veterans who end up with these medals of valor, they did something that maybe they're not proud of completely. Maybe they had to do something that they would not have done at any other circumstance, any other place. But they did it anyway, because that was their job. They had to protect their troops or themselves. And nobody should apologize for being alive. Nobody should apologize for surviving that war, no matter what they had to do. The same thing goes for every war. Persian Gulf vets, Grenada, now the war in the Balkans. We're going to have our comrades come back from those wars just as messed up as we were 30 years ago. And the reason is, war is war. That hasn't changed for hundreds of years. But we've got to deal with it as a society. We have to deal with violence in ourselves and in our society. We have to deal with high school students going on a rampage and shooting each other. We have to deal with a foreign policy where we have a dictator somewhere that's absolutely stark raving mad and would rather kill every one of his citizens in his country than admit that he's stark raving mad. And he's going to try to do that. We have to deal with this. Or not. We could just ignore it. We could just think it's all going to go away, but for young people thinking about going to the military, it doesn't go away. You've got to deal with it. So when you're debating with yourself what your opinion is on a foreign policy issue, realize it doesn't matter to the guys giving the orders what your opinion is, because it doesn't matter to the person who gave him his orders. The decision on whether or not to go into battle is not made by any GI. It's made by the people in charge, people in the White House and the Pentagon. When they give orders, you're expected to obey. If you don't, you need to come see me. You need to talk to somebody about conscientious objection and how to get out of the military because you finally realize that you don't want to be in. Or you need to talk to somebody about getting out of the military for some other reason. But that's my point. It's better never to have gone into the military than to have gotten into the military and realized that you're going to have to be a criminal for the rest of your life by facing charges as the only way to get out of going into combat if you don't want to go. A lot of people during Vietnam did that. They deserted. They went to Canada. They did time in the stockade rather than go to Vietnam. During the Gulf War, they slapped handcuffs on people, threw them on the planes, and flew them to the Gulf. They weren't going to give them a chance to desert. Now, we have a war going on where, as far as I'm concerned, there should be no draft on this war. There should only be volunteers on this. There should be no orders, but there are. Because that's the way the military is. They're going to give you the orders that they think are necessary. So, if you want to change those orders, you have to behave as a citizen, not as a member of the military. You have to call your congressman and try to convince those people to change national policy. Because you're sure not going to do that with one stripe on your arm in the military. You're going to have to implement that national policy, not conceive it. So as citizens, our jobs are a lot different than jobs as a military member. Realize that, and you're halfway to understanding the difference about what life in the military is really like and what life is like on the TV screen from the recruiting commercials. For a lot of people, it's a real simple decision. I have no option, therefore I must go into the military. I can't stand my father, he beats me all the time, he's a drunk. I have no college money, my family can't send me to school, I gotta go into the military to get that. There's a million different reasons to go into the military, all of them very good reasons for you at that time. But what I want you to do is try to imagine yourself after you're discharged from the military. What are you going to be doing then? Could you have had a different life for the past 4 years as a civilian than as a GI? What would it have been like to have flipped burgers for 6 months, work your way into a scholarship, get the VVAW grants, and go to school? And so by the time you got out of the military after 4 years, you could have had your 4-year degree, or be damn close to it. That's the thing. A lot of options that we're given now don't seem to be that viable. It seems like all of our options, all the alternatives in our life are leading down this one path to the uniform. And that's not true. This society has enough options open so that if you decide you want to get an education, there are ways to do it besides going in the military. And on that issue, I want to make sure that everybody understands the military benefits are not something that you're given in writing. Like I said, I work for the American Legion now. My job is helping GIs get benefits. But part of my job is also explaining to them why the law changed to take away their benefits. World War II vets went in, promised by the recruiters, by the president in national addresses, you go into the military and we win this war, we're going to take care of you the rest of your life. Well, now those veterans are locked out of the hospitals because that promise was not in writing. My dad recruited people in the military with the same promise in the 60s. If you go in and you spend your life in the military, not just 4 years, but you spend 20 years in the military will take care of you and your family the rest of your life. That's not true. They took those benefits away. Congress can do that. They run this country. They're the ones who decide who gets what benefits when. The GI Bill that everybody talks about. Over half of the Vietnam vets never used their GI Bill. It's still waiting to be used, but there's a 10-year limit on using the GI Bill. You have 10 years after your discharge to use it. A lot of guys were never sober long enough during those 10 years to use their GI Bill. And when they finally sobered up, it was too late. But they're out of luck. That's the same thing that GIs are going to be facing in the future. The benefits that you're promised and all the recruiting material you see today might be completely eroded, gone in another 5 months, another 5 years. Who knows? Again, it's up to the people as citizens to make sure that this government does the right thing as far as national policy. But it's up to you as an individual to make sure that you can live with yourself for what you do. And a lot of guys going in the military don't take the time to think about what the consequences, what the possible consequences are. Consequences obviously are getting maimed, killed, and dismembered in a military action, or coming back with PTSD, or not being able to use all of your GI benefits. There's a lot of other consequences too, but it has to do with how you view yourself. If you can get out of the military and feel proud of yourself, then you got lucky. And I gotta say, it's pure luck. A lot of us went in thinking that at that time in our life, that this was our way to make ourselves better. This was our way to create a life, a future. We could look and see ourselves as veterans at the age of 45 or 50 and having a good life. And now we're there. I gotta tell you, this is not what I expected 25 years ago. I did not expect to have to be doing this. I did not expect to have to spend my entire life trying to help veterans get what they deserve and what they were promised. I thought it was natural. I thought it would be given to us, but it's not. You got to fight for everything that you were promised, because it's just a promise. There's nothing in writing at this point. So I guess I want to end right at this point and ask for questions, because that's probably where a lot of people want to get involved. Questions?
People may not want to stand up and ask questions. Ray's going to be here. We're going to be here until 5 o'clock. So you're welcome to stop and talk to him at tables. And certainly, any of you who just came in, please visit the tables and pick up the literature. And then at 4 o'clock or a little after 4, we'll have another speaker. And we'll finish up everything at 5. So thank you all for coming so far. Call your friend.
People ask whether things have changed. 30 years ago, I was in Vietnam. People were called kooks and were being killed. People were being forced from their homelands into relocation camps. People were being raped. People were being murdered by the United States military. I oppose that. Because rape, because relocation is wrong. We may think that things have changed, but just a short time ago I was at Dartmouth doing a 2-day course on Vietnam, and one of the students, a real bright Vietnamese young man, a boat person whose father was a colonel in the ARVN, and he was asking me questions about Vietnam, and I was asking him questions. And he had had an appointment to West Point, but his father said, our family won't be involved in war anymore. My experience and your experience mean that it have to come to an end. The instructor is a real old friend of mine, who was the wife of a professional pilot, Navy pilot, and she'd been in the Philippines for years and years and years, working with widows whose husbands never came back from flying over North Vietnam. And she semi-adopted this young man who was bright, because she felt the Vietnamese in him, the war in him, and the pain of that war was for us a short time ago. And when he graduated, after listening to all our tales and his own father's tales, unfortunately, he made the decision for himself and he enlisted into the Marine Corps. And just a few months later, the young man called us asking for help. And it seems that things haven't changed that much. Even though he was at an officer basic course at Quantico, Virginia, the drill instructors were still saying, that he was a gook and that they had shot people like him in Vietnam. And the other people thought it was a joke to make fun of the fact that he was Vietnamese in the U.S. Marine Corps. He needs help, and luckily he thought about us and about his teacher to help him get out. Most of the people here are choir, people who have done stuff and people who are doing stuff, not email activists, but people at different times who put themselves on the line. And so I'm not going to preach to you like I would to someone in a high school yesterday, but I am going to say something. I'm impressed with the work that goes on down here and the caliber of people consistently are here. I mean, I come here, and every year Joe saves somebody from the military.
Where are they at?
I mean, imagine that. Every year, one young person does not go in the military. Some of them join us. John, who was back here, who would have been and should have been a Marine officer, who fought Joe every step of the way in VVAW, last year on the day he was to be commissioned, instead of showing up and putting on Marine blues, put on Levi's and worked with us feeding homeless vets in Chicago. Every year we save one or two people. And it'd be nice if we had a giant movement and there were tens of thousands of people. It'd be nice if we could debate, pretend like we were leading thousands and thousands, but we have to deal with what we've got. And quite frankly, if all we save every year is one person, it's worth it. Yesterday we were speaking in the high school, and two young Afro-American girls said that their friends were going to join the Marine Corps. Why did they join? What is it that makes young men go in the Marine Corps? And we told them, trying to prove you're a man, get a uniform, get away from home when you're poor. But most importantly, what we told them was that they had a political and a personal responsibility to convince their friends not to go in. That they didn't have to go out in the street and get arrested. They didn't have to get the teeth knocked out of them. All they had to do was talk to their friends and stop them from enlisting. And if they did that, they were politically active and they were saving a person's life. And in 5 years, they would have something they could look back on and be thankful about. And that's all we have to do for them. We have some differences of opinion. We need to treat ourselves with respect. We'll act like the people in the U.S. Congress who are phonies anyway. I just want to thank you for inviting me down here. I want to thank you, those of you I've worked with, those of you in VVAW, those of you in the anti-racist mascot troop, those of you that are in the Disciples, those of you who are doing political work to change the world, my friends and my comrades. And I think we should end this day by just giving ourselves an applause. And that's all.
Thank you all for spending some time with us today. Please, if you haven't, stop by the literature tables and talk to people. We've got some time. We'll take some time to chat with people. If you're interested in getting on a mailing list to find out about our activities, there's a mailing list out on the front table. Don't be shy about that. We're not going to send you any marketing things or anything like that, well, except for maybe t-shirts. So please feel free, just wander around. We're going to be taking this thing down probably in about 20 minutes or so. Help yourselves, right? Thanks again for coming.